probably Keats in this very room sat here and questioned what the point of poetry, what are we trying to do with it, can we change the world, um, love poetry versus political poetry, can they come together, all these things. Um, I don't think they would have been out of place in Keats's time. I came to Keats through Shelley. Um, I was at the Edinburgh Festival one year, and I was staying in a house. This is a bit unusual for me. I usually demand a hotel, but for some reason I ended up staying in a house. And there wasn't very many books in the room, but there was one book that stood out, a big fat thing called Red Shelley by Paul Foote. And I took it up and I started to read it. And I'm dyslexic, so I'm a kind of slow reader, but I read it in like 2 sittings. And it's all about Shelley. There's not that much of his poetry in it, it's just about him. And I was just amazed. I just thought, I used to think that Shelley was one of the dead white male poets that I used to dismiss. After reading this book, I thought, this is a brother I'd like to hang out with. You know, what he was trying to do with language and politics is kind of what I'm trying to do now in my work. And then I understood that he was connected to the Romantic movement. What was that? You know, and I started to look at Byron and then Keats, of course. So at first, I found them very difficult. But what helped me was, I suppose this is what happened with Shelley, was not just going to the poetry, but first of all going to the person. I'm not sure if this is correct, I'm not sure if teachers would do this normally, but I find that if the person turns me on and I understand the politics and the times they were living in, then reading the poetry is much more easier. I want to read it, I want to understand it. I don't get to think apart and think, oh, that's too difficult, just skip over it and I'll come back to it later. I think, you know, I want to know what this means because this person wouldn't waste this line. You know? And that's, in fact, although I don't do much teaching, if I ever do talk about Shelley or some poet from the past, I will usually talk about the times they were living in. If I'm talking about Shelley, Byron and Keats, I'll talk about the government of the day, Castlereagh, and what was going on in Spain and things like this. If you want to talk about a poem like the Mask of Anarchy, to just read the Mask of Anarchy and not talk about the Peterloo riots, it just doesn't make sense. So the more I understood about Keats, the more I understood his poetry and the more I began to love his poetry. But I tell you, one of the gems of Keats, if you can really get into it, is reading his letters. Oh, his letters, and most of them exist to Fanny. It is poetry in itself.